Welcome to my channel. I'm Nancy Miller, your storyteller, bringing you American folktales, thrilling mysteries, and all sorts of other yarns. Join me for today's story, folks. Lily Baker sat in her carriage, peering out at the bustling streets with a faint smile, trying to dodge the chatter of the noisy crowd. She let out a sigh. Her maid, Emma, noticed her mistress seemed weighed down by a heap of troubles. "Cheer up, Miss Lily," Emma said. "We worked hard to get out for a day like this. Don't let it go to waste moping. Look how lively it is out there. You ought to take a stroll." Lily managed a bittersweet chuckle. If only she could be as carefree as Emma, wouldn't that be something? She'd grown up in a wealthy family, the kind where clothes were handed to her and meals were served on a silver platter from the day she was born. To everyone else, she shone like a star, pretty polished, the belle of the ball. Her life was the stuff ordinary girls could only dream of. So why the worry? Well, her whole future was on her mind. The Baker family had a daughter coming of age, and with that came a slew of relatives and expectations. She wasn't just anybody, she was the talk of the town. And her marriage? That had been set in stone by her father, Mr. Harold Baker, years ago. He'd arranged for her to wed Tom Carver, a match decided when they were still kids. Tom Carver was her age, from a respectable family, and his dad was big on keeping up appearances. Mr. Carver always had a saying for everything, and when it came to his kids' marriages, he didn't mess around. But Lily wasn't having it. Sure, she'd spent most of her life cooped up in the Baker estate, rarely stepping out or meeting folks beyond the gates. She'd known Tom since they were little. He'd come over to play back in the day. Even then, he rubbed her the wrong way. Maybe he'd been an ugly duckling who'd grown into his looks, but that wasn't the point. The real kicker was Tom's rotten streak as a kid. The housemaids whispered about how he'd torment them, making dolls out of their stuff, smashing things just for kicks. Lily couldn't stomach the thought of tying the knot with someone like that, let alone spending her whole life with him. No, her heart was set elsewhere. She'd secretly fallen for a guy named Lucas Stone. She'd met him last year at the County Theater Festival, and the moment their eyes locked, she was smitten. Trouble was, she'd never worked up the nerve to talk to him, and Lucas didn't have a clue how she felt. This marriage mess wasn't his doing, though. Her folks wanted her hitched to Tom Carver, and her dad had just told her mom to break the news. It was a done deal, they said. Lily was fuming. She wanted to storm up to her father and argue, but she didn't dare. All she could do was vent to her mom, who just shrugged and said, "A man's gotta marry when he's grown, and a woman's no different. Once you're wed to the Carvers, that's that." Besides, her dad was a stubborn man with a sharp mind and a sharper pride. Her mom wouldn't dream of crossing him. So Lily spent her days quietly crying, washing her face with tears. She might have been the golden girl of the Baker clan, but in that big house, the only one she could really talk to was Emma. Emma tried her best to lighten the mood. She couldn't fully grasp her mistress's heartache, though. To her, the Carver family was a solid match. "After the wedding, you'll be set," she'd say. "You'll have kids, carry on the Carver name, what's there to fret about?" But she didn't get it. Lily wasn't after security. She wanted freedom, love, a spark in her soul. Still, Emma hated seeing her so down. Every day, she'd try something new to cheer her up. This outing? She'd begged Mr. Baker for it, just to give Lily a breather. But seeing Lily still sulking, Emma's excitement fizzled out. She hung her head and muttered, "Miss, if you're not feeling it, maybe we should head back. Doesn't seem like much fun around here anyway." Lily felt a pang of guilt. Emma had been by her side since they were kids, servant and mistress in name, but more like sisters in truth. Emma bent over backwards to make her happy, and here she was, dragging the mood down. Steeling herself, Lily forced a brighter tone. "No, I'm in the mood now. Let's not turn back yet." Emma's eyes lit up, and she clapped her hands. "That's the spirit, miss. Why don't you step out of the carriage? We'll leave the drivers here and take a walk." Lily nodded with a grin, ready to stretch her legs and shake off her gloom, at least for a little while. Lily Baker agreed with a smile, but the carriage drivers weren't keen on staying put. Back when they'd set out, Mr. Harold Baker had given them strict orders: "Don't let my daughter out of your sight. If anything happens to her, you'll answer for it." Seeing the drivers itching to tag along, Lily's face darkened. She fixed them with a hard stare, and the men shrank back, avoiding her gaze. Sure, she was kind to folks, But that didn't mean she couldn't put her foot down. Besides, the drivers felt bad seeing her cooped up and glum all the time. They weren't heartless. Lily softened and flashed a bold grin. Emma and I are just taking a stroll. What, you think we'll get lost? You've worked hard enough, stay here. We'll toss you some cash so you can grab a bite while you wait. She nodded to Emma, who dug into her pocket and handed the drivers a few bucks. With that, Lily took Emma's hand, and the two stepped out together, ready to explore. It was just past the town's big 4th of July bash, and the summer heat was kicking in. Crickets chirped in the grass, but beyond the greenery, there wasn't much to write home about. It wasn't exactly prime outing season, just a chance to unwind. The pair didn't mind, though. Emma, with her kid-like curiosity, couldn't help but gawk at everything, snagging some snacks from a street vendor for Lily to try. Normally, Lily wouldn't touch food from a roadside stand, but walking like this? It lifted her spirits. For a moment, she could shove her worries aside. They wandered for a bit until they hit the riverbank up ahead. The crowd thickened as they went, and Emma suggested they rest under a big oak by the water. Lily nodded, happy to take a break. Little did she know, fate had other plans. As they approached, a commotion broke out nearby, a knot of people arguing, voices rising. Lily wasn't one for gawking at drama, but Emma's eyes sparkled with excitement. Before Lily could protest, Emma grabbed her arm and dragged her toward the ruckus. Pushing through the crowd, Lily froze. There, in the thick of it, were two groups squaring off. On one side stood a guy about 20, shielding an old man, none other than Lucas Stone. He was locked in a heated spat with the other side, a flashy young man waving a fancy folding fan, oozing arrogance. This was Don Prince, flanked by 3 cronies. Lucas's voice cut through the noise. "Don, this old guy was just in a hurry and bumped into you. Why are you making a mountain out of a molehill?" Don smirked, snapping his fan shut and tapping it against his palm. He tilted his head, sneering at Lucas. "You got any idea how much this suit's worth, Stone? He scuffs it, he pays. You wanna play hero? Fine, cough up the cash yourself." Lucas's face went red. Lily, watching from the sidelines, took him in. He was dressed simple, clean, but nothing fancy. Yet here he was, standing up for some stranger, an old-timer no less. It only made her admire him more. Still, she couldn't just butt in, not with all these people around. If word got back to her dad, with his temper and pride, he'd hit the roof. She was still wrestling with her thoughts when Emma, beside her, couldn't hold back any longer. Emma might have been a maid, but she had a heart of gold. Seeing Don Prince in his slick getup bullying a poor old man flipped a switch in her. She piped up loud and clear, "Mr. Prince, you look like an educated fella. Ever hear of treating folks with a little decency? Picking on an old man like that, what's your excuse?" Don spun around, his smug grin fading into a scowl as he spotted Emma and Lily. Then his expression shifted, he snapped open his fan, gave it a couple of flicks, and put on a charming act. "Well, well, don't you ladies know quality when you see it? This suit." Before he could finish, one of his lackeys leaned in and whispered something. Don's smug look faltered for a split second, then he recovered. "Turns out I'm pals with Tom Carver," he said smoothly. "Since you're a baker, Miss Lily, I'll let this slide. Catch you later." With that, he turned on his heel and strutted off with his crew. The crowd, there for the show, started to scatter once the drama fizzled. Left behind were Lily, Emma, Lucas, and the old man, who was wiping tears from his weathered face. He thanked Lucas and Emma profusely. Lucas rummaged in his pockets, pulling out a few coins. "It's all I've got," he said, pressing them into the old man's hand. "Get yourself some grub." As the old man shuffled off, Lucas turned to Lily and Emma with a shy nod. "Thanks for the backup. I remember you two from last year's Flower Fest. Your gift really helped me out." But he didn't linger to chat. Lily noticed a gash on his arm, probably from Don's goons before she and Emma showed up. Her heart twinged. Lucas might have come from a humble family, but he had a shine to him, honest, upright, with eyes that looked right into you. She felt her cheeks heat up. "Lucas, Mr. Stone, I mean you're hurt," she stammered, pulling out her handkerchief. "Let me patch that up." Emma's jaw dropped. "Miss Lily, what are you doing? That's your personal hanky, it's got your initials stitched on it." You can't just use it on some guy. But Lily didn't care. She gently tied it around Lucas's arm, then blushed hard when she realized how close they'd gotten. Lucas, cool as ever, thanked her again with a warm smile. The moment was fleeting though, they didn't have much to say with all that had just happened. As he turned to go, Lily blurted out, "Wait. Could you bring the handkerchief back? Say 3 days from now, noon, right here by the river." Lucas nodded. "Sure thing. I'll be here." Then he walked off. Emma rounded on Lily the second he was out of earshot. "Miss, that was reckless. If your dad finds out." Lily barely heard her, lost in a daze. The outing was over, she didn't feel like wandering anymore. She led Emma back to the carriage, her mind spinning. Sitting inside as they rolled home, she couldn't stop thinking about Lucas and their little deal in 3 days. That handkerchief? It was her excuse to see him again. She clutched the thought tight, a small smile tugging at her lips. Emma, walking beside the carriage, caught on quick. She was sharp as a tack. Watching Lily alternate between prim composure and giddy grins, she rolled her eyes and muttered, "This girl's gone spring crazy in broad daylight. What a mess." Lily's face went scarlet. She shot Emma a glare through the window. Emma stuck out her tongue in return, and the carriage pulled up to the Baker house. Stepping out, Lily's mood sank again. The thought of her father's stern face dragged her spirits back down to earth. As the carriage rolled to a stop in front of the Baker house, Lily Baker stepped out, her brief spark of joy snuffed out. The thought of her father's cold, unyielding stare sent her heart plummeting. She couldn't wrap her head around it. Why did life have to be so full of letdowns? Take Tom Carver, for instance. She'd rather not lay eyes on him ever again, but if she married him, she'd be stuck facing that smug mug for the rest of her days. What kind of misery was that? She trudged inside and headed straight to her room, plopping down by the window. Propping her chin on her hand, she gazed out at the world beyond. Even the birds flitting around out there had more freedom than she did. She couldn't even measure up to a sparrow. "Stop overthinking it," she muttered to herself. "This marriage your dad's set up? You don't get a say in it." Emma, who'd grown up with her and knew her every mood, hovered nearby. She could tell what was eating at her mistress. Sometimes, she spotted things Lily didn't even see in herself, like how right now, she was clearly mooning over Lucas Stone without admitting it. That just made Emma resent Tom Carver, and this whole wedding plan from Mr. Harold Baker, even more. Lily sighed aloud, half to herself. "I'd rather stay single forever than go through with this." Emma's eyes widened. "Miss Lily, you're the eldest daughter. Folks expect you to tie the knot, it's just how it goes. Doesn't mean it's gotta be Lucas Stone though." Lily's face flushed crimson, caught off guard by Emma calling it out so plain. Deep down, she knew Emma was right. Her and Lucas? They were like two trains on opposite tracks. Maybe they'd crossed paths for a fleeting moment, but they were bound to veer apart. The thought stabbed at her heart like a knife. She didn't have the energy to talk anymore, let alone drag herself downstairs. The next 3 days crawled by in a haze of misery. But when the day came for Lucas to return her handkerchief, Lily perked up. She'd been buzzing with anticipation since dawn. Trouble was, the weather wasn't cooperating. The morning sky hung heavy with clouds, and after breakfast, it turned downright gloomy, sticky and stifling, the kind of air that screamed a storm was brewing. If she asked her dad to go out in this, he'd shut her down flat. What now? Today was her shot to see Lucas. They'd set this date by the river 3 days ago. Emma was the only one in on it, and truth be told, she wasn't thrilled about Lily meeting him again. A downpour would be the perfect excuse for her to miss it. But then she remembered that handkerchief still in Lucas's hands. If he flashed it around town, Lily's reputation would take a hit. So Emma hatched a plan. She'd go in Lily's place, snag the hanky, and bring it back. Lily wouldn't hear of it. 3 days I've waited for this, she snapped. You think I'm letting you go instead? Emma was out of moves, so she came up with a sneaky backup. They'd both slip into plain blue jackets and caps from the servant's stash, sneak out the side door, and dodge Mr. Baker's eagle eye. He'd never guess his daughter wasn't holed up in her room on a day like this. She'd be out in the wild. Once they were free of the house, Lily felt like a bird let loose from its cage. It was still hours till noon, but she couldn't wait around. No mood for dawdling, they went straight to the river. When they got there, Emma grumbled, "We're way too early. Noon's when you said, Mississippi. Why rush?" Lily shot her a look, half annoyed, half amused. With the sky so dark and the heat pressing down, she waved Emma off. "Go poke around if you want. I'll wait here, you don't need to babysit me." Emma, ever the explorer, spotted some vendors in the distance and didn't need telling twice. She tossed Lily an umbrella and scampered off to browse. Alone under a towering oak by the river, Lily watched the water ripple. Loving someone who didn't know how you felt? Pure torture. She'd fallen hard for Lucas Stone, but what gnawed at her was not knowing if he felt anything back. She couldn't just ask him outright. What would that make her? The uncertainty chewed her up inside. Time slipped by, she wasn't sure how long, when a chill cut through the muggy air. A breeze kicked up, and she glanced skyward. 2 dark clouds rolled in from the northeast, shoved together by the wind. As the gusts grew sharper, the clouds collided overhead, tangling into a mess of black, flashing with hints of lightning. Her stomach knotted. Rain was coming, soon. What if Lucas didn't show? Just then she caught movement in the river, a ripple, then a massive triangular head broke the surface from the reeds. Her brain nearly short-circuited. It was a giant snake, slithering up from the water. As it emerged, the clouds fused above, and a thunderclap shook the air. Lightning cracked, and rain poured down in sheets. Lily fumbled with her umbrella, but she was soaked before she could pop it open. In the storm's roar, the snake reared up, staring skyward as lightning zeroed in on the river. A bolt struck it dead on, but it didn't flinch, it rose higher, suspended between water and sky. Lily gaped, dumbfounded. For more bolts hit, and the snake took them like a champ. Then came a deafening boom, a lightning strike as thick as a tree trunk slammed into it, hurling it out of the river to land at her feet on the bank. The storm raged on, but the snake was spent, its body twitching as it tried to crawl back to the water. Its skin was cracked, every inch a struggle. It got halfway in before stalling, too weak to go further. It twisted its head, locking eyes with Lily, who stood frozen, mouth agape. Something about its pitiful state tugged at her. She, who'd normally scream at a garter snake, felt a pang of pity. Gritting her teeth, she snapped her umbrella shut and used it to shove the snake's bulk back into the river. She wasn't strong, years of staying indoors hadn't done her any favors, but she pushed with everything she had, panting and soaked to the bone. The snake hit the water, rolled twice, then surged upright again, facing down one last bolt. Lightning zapped its head, and in a flash, it twisted skyward, tail lashing as it shot into the clouds and vanished. A voice echoed in her ears, "Your kindness has helped me succeed today. I'll repay you. I'm leaving you a snake scale, keep it. If trouble comes, hold it tight and call for help in your heart. I'll find you through a strand of your hair and return the favor." The words faded, and the rain stopped cold. Thunder and lightning quit, and the clouds parted to reveal blue sky. Emma came sprinting back, hauling Lily up from the muddy ground. "Miss, what were you thinking? That downpour, and you didn't even use the umbrella." Lily blinked, dazed. Had she just dreamed that whole snake ordeal? But then she felt it, a dark red scale in her left hand. Dream or not, she couldn't tell. She clenched it tight and didn't breathe a word to Emma. "Miss Baker, I'm so sorry I got held up and left you in the rain," came a voice, Lucas Stone's. Lily's heart sank a little. She was drenched, clothes plastered to her skin, looking like a drowned rat. Lucas didn't hesitate though. He shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders, easing her embarrassment. Then he handed her the cleaned handkerchief, thanked her again, and turned to leave. "Hold on." Lily called. 3 days from now, same spot, could you bring the jacket back?" Lucas smiled. "You got it. See you then." And he was gone. Emma rolled her eyes so hard they nearly popped out. 3 days to return this, 3 days for that, your dad's gonna catch on, miss, and then we're toast. Soaked as she was, Lily didn't care. She'd seen Lucas again, that was worth everything. Little did she know, a bigger storm was waiting back home. Lily Baker slipped back into the house through the side door, her spirits high despite the soggy clothes clinging to her. She'd barely changed into dry duds in her room when another maid popped in, looking nervous. "Miss, your dad wants you in the parlor now." Her stomach churned as she stepped out, unease creeping up her spine. When she walked in, it wasn't just her father, Harold Baker, waiting, her mom Clara was there too. Harold's face was a thundercloud, dark and grim. 2 days from now, he barked, you're marrying Tom Carver. No changing it.
Lily est si rend.
She couldn't believe it. 2 days? The house hadn't even started prepping for a wedding. None of the usual bustle, no decorations, nothing. This had to be a snap decision. What the heck had happened? Harold stormed off without another word, leaving Clara to sigh and fix Lily with a weary look. You were down by the river, weren't you? The Carvers got wind of it. Tom's buddy Don Prince saw you tearing into someone there. Your dad's all about saving face. He figures marrying you off quick'll hush it up. It clicked for Lily then. That slimy Don Prince must have spotted her with Lucas by the river and blabbed to Tom. Probably spun some tale about her flirting around, and now her folks were in a panic. Clara didn't stick around to hear Lily's protests. She just walked out, ignoring her daughter's teary pleas. It wasn't that Clara didn't care. Harold's word was law, and she couldn't budge him. Lily stopped crying, dragging herself back to her room in a daze. She barely registered Emma trying to comfort her. After a bit, she waved her off. Emma, grab those wet clothes I left and get rid of them. Emma obeyed, stepping out with the bundle. When she came back though, she froze. Lily had a pair of scissors in her hand, poised over her chest. Emma lunged, grabbing her wrist. Miss, no. But Lily fought back, wild and determined. They tussled, knocking over a chair, until the racket brought another maid running. Soon, Harold and Clara burst in, staring at their daughter wrestling with death. Dad, Lily spat, breathless, you can force me to marry him, but you can't stop me from dying. Harold's whole body shook, rage and shock mixing. Clara sobbed helplessly. What could they do? After a long tense silence, Harold steadied himself and glared at Lily. This is about that Lucas Stone boy, isn't it? Fine, spill it. If you don't want Tom Carver, we'll call Lucas over and see if he'll marry you. But will he even say yes? Lily blinked, stunned. Her dad was backing down? If she'd known he'd bend, she'd have spoken up sooner instead of tearing his heart out like this. Harold, seeing her guilt, snapped at the family butler. Go to the Stone place right now. Tell Lucas to get over here. He turned back to Lily. Sit tight, we'll see what he says. If Lucas agreed, it'd be 2 days still, he'd come fetch her at dusk. Lily felt like she'd been through hell and back that day. She started to apologize, but Harold cut her off, his voice stern. You're my only girl, Lily. I could have pushed you harder, but I was mad you didn't trust me with the truth. She mumbled apologies, guilt gnawing at her. But a new worry crept in. What if Lucas didn't want her? He didn't even know she'd been pining for him. If he said no, her whole meltdown would look like a fool's tantrum. 2 agonizing hours later, the butler returned. Lucas heard the offer and said yes on the spot. He'll be here in 2 days to pick her up. Lily's heart leapt, though she kept it under wraps, still reeling from how she'd hurt her folks. Emma, though, wasn't buying it. Hold on, she whispered later. The Bakers throwing a wedding's a big deal. Why's it so rushed? And Lucas agreeing just like that, no questions? He didn't even come check with us first. Lily was too caught up in her joy to overthink it. Marrying the guy she loved beat tying the knot with Tom Carver any day, rushed or not. 2 days later, she was decked out in a red dress, hastily prepped, but festive enough. She pulled a veil over her face and waited quietly, nerves buzzing. Emma had been a whirlwind these past days, fussing over details. Right up till dusk, she'd been digging around, trying to track down Lucas and confirm this wedding was legit. But she couldn't slip out, every door had eyes on it, and she was stuck. As night fell, a noisy procession rolled up to the Baker house, horns blaring, drums thumping. Lily, veiled, was led to a sedan chair and carried off amid the racket. Inside, doubts nibbled at her. Emma should have been there, her personal maid, her shadow. She'd follow Lily to Lucas's place after the wedding, right? But Emma wasn't among the hands helping her out or settling her in. Where was she? Lily brushed it off. Once she was married, Emma would catch up. She let herself sink into the thrill of finally getting what she wanted, nerves tingling as a bride-to-be. The sedan stopped, and someone guided her through the vows. But something felt off. Lucas's family was dirt poor, How'd they afford this big to-do? Peeking under her veil, she saw too many feet, way more folks than a broke kid like Lucas could muster. Maybe her dad had chipped in, she reasoned, not wanting her wedding to look cheap. She clung to that thought as she was led to the bridal suite. Sitting on the bed's edge, she waited for Lucas to lift her veil. The door creaked open, footsteps approached, and the veil came off. Lily froze, her shy smile dying. It wasn't Lucas, it was Tom Carver. The truth hit her like a freight train. Her dad, so proud and pig-headed, wouldn't cave that easy. Seeing her ready to die over Tom, he'd cooked up a ruse, sent the butler to fake a deal with Lucas, when really he'd gone straight to the Carvers. That's why Emma was missing. Harold had locked her up to keep her from spilling that Tom was the groom. Now what? Tom grinned, smug as ever, eyeing her panic. Well, wife, how about a toast by the river? He'd finally snagged Lily Baker, and his pride was bursting. He reached for her, handsy already. Lily's mind raced, terror choking her. If tonight went through, it'd be done, raw rice cooked, her fate sealed as Mrs. Carver. In a flash, she remembered the snake scale. She'd strung it on a cord around her wrist after that rainy day. Now she yanked it free, clutching it tight, screaming help, in her head. A gust whipped up outside. Guests at the reception gasped as a red lightning bolt streaked from the sky, blasting the bridal suite with a boom. When the dust settled, they saw Lily, still in her red dress, bolting out. Inside, Tom sat dazed on the floor, muttering dragon, a huge dragon, over and over, eyes blank. Lily ran, heart pounding, and halfway home, she crashed into Emma. Don't go back. Emma hissed. Your dad'll find you and ship you right back to Tom's place. One thing led to another. If her dad said she'd marry Lucas, then Lucas it was. They hightailed it to his shack. Lucas was floored when they burst in, spilling the tale. He'd always liked Lily from their few run-ins, but figured his poor roots kept her out of reach, buried those feelings deep. Now she wanted him? He wasn't saying no. With Emma and a couple of Lucas's buddies as witnesses, they tied the knot that night. Next morning, Harold Baker stormed over with a posse, ready to raise hell. But when Lily and Lucas stepped out hand in hand, he knew he'd lost. The deed was done, raw rice cooked. He'd shot himself in the foot with his own scheme. What could he say? He turned and left. After the wedding, Lily settled into a simple life with Lucas, happy despite the lean times. Years later, Lucas hit the books hard, passed the state exams, and landed a government gig. Harold finally warmed up to his son-in-law then. Lucas's career took them all over, but he always brought Lily along. They loved each other till their last breath. And that, folks, wraps up our first tale. Stick around, Nancy Miller's got another one coming your way. Don't miss it. The next story's an old American yarn called The Wolf in the Cattle Barn. You'll love it, trust me, once you start you're hooked. Alright folks, welcome back to my channel. I'm Nancy Miller, your guide through America's wildest tales. We just wrapped up Lily Baker's whirlwind romance. Hope you enjoyed that ride. Now, let's dive into our second story, a classic yarn called The Wolf in the Cattle Barn. It's a folk tale packed with grit, heart, and a twist or two. Buckle up, it's gonna grab you from the get-go. Picture this, it's the 1850s, out in Plainview County, Tennessee, during the days when the frontier was still rough around the edges. There lived a young fella named Levi Winston. His dad, Amos Winston, had been a schoolteacher, a learned man who tried his hand at the state exams but never passed. Amos carried that disappointment like a sack of bricks, and when Levi came along, he pinned all his dashed dreams on his boy. He named him Levi, hoping the kid would one day rise to the top, a shining star in the family name. Amos might not have snagged a fancy title, but he was sharp as a tack, known for miles around as a man who could spin a lesson out of thin air. Trouble was, after striking out 3 times on those exams, he gave up the ghost on that dream. Instead, he settled into teaching the local farm kids how to read and write, scratching out a living in the countryside. From the time Levi could toddle, he tagged along to those lessons, soaking up every word his old man dished out. Amos poured his soul into raising Levi right. He wanted his boy to make something of himself, and Levi didn't let him down. By 15, he'd aced the county scholars test, earning a reputation as a bright spark near and far. Amos was over the moon. Finally, his son might climb higher than he ever did. But just when hope was blooming, Amos took sick, real bad. Before long he was gone, laid to rest under a Tennessee oak. When Amos was alive, the Winston place wasn't exactly rolling in dough, but they got by, food on the table, clothes on their backs. After he passed, though, Levi's mom, Ruth, couldn't handle the grief. She withered away and followed Amos to the grave not long after. With both parents gone, Levi's world caved in. No income, no safety net, just a kid alone in a hardscrabble life. To keep his head above water, Levi had to ditch his studies. He drifted into Plainview's little town square, looking for any work he could find. An old-timer named Jed Carter took pity on him. Jed ran a general store and offered Levi a job helping out in the back, tending the oil lamps and hauling supplies. It wasn't glamorous, but it beat starving. Once he settled in, Levi turned into Jed's oil runner, fetching kerosene, filling lanterns, keeping the place lit. 3 days back, Jed got word that the Cloud Spring Church, 10 miles out, was gearing up for a week-long revival. They'd need barrels of lamp oil to keep the tent glowing through those long prayer nights. Jed and Levi spent days pressing and bottling oil like madmen. Come the morning of the revival's kickoff, Levi slung a yoke over his shoulders, loaded it with oil cans, and set off to peddle his wares at the church. He sold every drop and headed back, bone-tired from the trek. About a mile from Cloud Spring, he plopped down under a big sycamore to catch his breath. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows, and he figured he'd rest a spell before the haul home. How long he dozed he couldn't say, but a ruckus jolted him awake, a commotion up the road, folks hollering and milling about. Rubbing sleep from his eyes, Levi squinted at the scene. The sun was halfway to setting now, painting the sky orange. He hoisted his empty yoke and started toward town, figuring he'd skirt whatever mess was brewing. But as he passed the crowd, a woman's wail cut through the chatter, sharp, heartbroken. Curiosity got the better of him. He slowed his steps, edged closer, and nudged his way into the throng to see what was what. Levi Winston elbowed his way through the crowd, yoke still slung over his shoulder, and caught sight of the trouble. A young woman, maybe 20 or so, knelt on the dusty road, tears streaming down her face. She was pleading with a well-dressed fella, Trent Parker, a local rich kid known for throwing his weight around. At Trent's feet sat a mangy hound, tongue lolling out, barking up a storm at the woman. "Mr. Parker, please," she sobbed, "let me and my boy go. Have some mercy." Trent let out a cold laugh. "Mercy? You're making it sound easy, lady. You think you can just smash up my dog and walk away? This here's my prize hound. I paid good money for him, $10 cash from a trader up in Knoxville. Look at him, your little stunt knocked half the fur off his hide. Pay up, or we've got problems." "Mr. Parker," she choked out, "my boy was just walking along fine when your mutt came snarling at him. I was scared he'd get bit. I only threw a rock to shoo it off. How's that wrong?" Levi pieced it together as he listened. 9 times out of 10, Trent had been strutting around with his dog off its leash, and this gal, trying to shield her kid, chucked a stone to scare it off. A simple thing, but Trent wasn't letting it slide. He wanted cash, and he was leaning hard on her. It was plain old bullying, and it lit a fire under Levi. He stepped forward, voice steady. "Hold on, Mr. Parker. Ain't nothing wrong with taking your dog for a walk, but that beast's mean as sin. You ought to keep it tied up so it don't go after folks. This lady was just looking out for her kid, anybody'd do the same if that hound came charging. Seems to me you're making a fuss over nothing. Let it go." Trent's face twisted, red with embarrassment turning to rage. "Who do you think you are, huh? Some nobody sticking his nose in my business? I don't leash my dog, so what? I've got the cash to back it up. If he bites somebody, I'll pay him off. A broke dirtbag's life ain't worth half what this hound is. Get lost." That did it. Levi's temper flared 3 feet high. "Look at you, all high and mighty in your fancy duds, talking like your mouth's full of manure. You let that dog run wild, scare folks half to death, then act like king of the hill when they fight back. Where's the law in that?" Levi's words struck a nerve. Trent's smirk vanished, and he jabbed a finger at his hound. "Get him, Rusty. Tear him up." Sure enough, that dog took after its master's rotten streak. With a snarl, it lunged at Levi, teeth bared and claws flying. Levi saw it coming and didn't flinch. He swung the yoke off his shoulder and brought it down hard. Crack. The wooden beam caught Rusty square on the skull. The dog yelped once and dropped like a sack of potatoes, out cold, or worse. Trent hollered, charging at Levi in a fury. "You'll pay for that, you," but he didn't get far. The crowd, fed up with his nonsense, surged forward, blocking him off. Levi didn't waste a second. He scooped up the woman's kid, a scrawny boy clinging to her skirt, grabbed her arm, and bolted. They ran for a good 15 minutes, weaving through back trails till Trent's yells faded into the dusk. Finally, they stopped, panting in the dim light. The woman caught her breath and turned to Levi. "Thank you, mister. You saved us back there." "Ma'am, it's gettin' dark," Levi said, glancing at the sky. "I reckon that Parker fella ain't the type to quit easy. Where's home? I'll walk you there." From her, Levi learned her name was Sadie Green. She lived out in Parker's Hollow, 10 miles off, a little settlement named ironic-like after Trent's kin. Sadie's life hadn't been easy. 5 years back, at 15, she'd married a man named Jim Green. 2 years in, Jim died in a logging accident, leaving her widowed with a toddler. She never remarried, instead moving in with her father-in-law, old man Luke Green, to raise her boy, Tommy. The Green place wasn't much. Sadie scraped by weaving cloth for neighbors, earning a few cents here and there. Old Luke, though, was a deadbeat, lazy as a hound in the sun, always sneaking off to gamble in town. He lost more than he won, and when the money ran dry, he'd come begging Sadie for her hard-earned scraps. She was stretched thin, body and soul. That day, Tommy had taken sick, so Sadie hauled him to Plainview to see a doc. On the way back, Trent's dog came out of nowhere, snapping at the boy. Scared stiff, Sadie grabbed a rock and winged it at the hound. Not hard enough to kill, mind you, just to spook it. She didn't have the strength for more. But Trent blew it up, claiming she'd ruined his precious Rusty's coat and demanding she fork over cash she didn't have. By the time Levi got the whole story, they'd reached her rundown shack in Parker's Hollow. It had been 2 days since he'd left Cloud Spring Church, and he'd meant to head home after dropping her off. Sadie was a widow, though, and him staying over didn't sit right, folks talk. But just as he turned to go, the weather flipped. Thunder rumbled, and rain came down in buckets, turning the trail to mud. Sadie hesitated, then spoke up. "Mister, I owe you big, but my father-in-law's a suspicious old coot. If he catches me bringin' a stranger inside, he'll raise Cain, probably cook up some fool story about me. We've got a cattle barn out back, though. It's beat up, but it'll keep the rain off. If you don't mind, stay there tonight." The downpour wasn't letting up, so Levi nodded and followed her to the barn. It was a rickety thing, gaps in the boards, straw scattered around, but it beat drowning. He settled in, exhaustion hitting hard, and drifted off quick. Middle of the night, a noise snapped him awake. He blinked, groggy, and peered out a crack in the barn wall. Under the shack's window, a shadowy figure was banging on the door, growling low. "Sadie, open up. I've got something to say." "Pa, I'm asleep," came her tired reply from inside. "Whatever it is, save it for mornin'." Levi tensed. That had to be old man Luke, the no-good gambler she'd mentioned. Something was up, and it didn't sound good. Levi Winston crouched in the leaky cattle barn, ears perked as old man Luke hammered on Sadie Green's door. From her groggy reply, Levi could tell she wasn't keen on letting him in, but the old coot wasn't giving up. "Sadie, this can't wait," Luke barked, his voice slurred, probably from a night of whiskey and cards. "Open the dang door, it's now or never." Inside, Sadie sighed, long and weary. Levi heard the creak of floorboards as she shuffled over and unlatched the door. He didn't like the sound of this. Luke was trouble, and Sadie didn't need more grief. Quiet as a shadow, Levi slipped out of the barn and crept under the shack's window to listen. "What's so all-fired urgent, Pa?" Sadie asked, her tone sharp. "I'll tell you straight, we ain't got a penny left. What little I scraped together's for Tommy's medicine. If you're after cash, button your lip." Luke chuckled, low and mean. "Ain't here for your money, girl. Fact is, I've got some." He jingled a coin pouch, the clink cutting through the night. "But here's the kicker, come sunrise, you won't be my daughter-in-law no more. I sold you off to Sam Tucker." Sadie gasped, her voice breaking into a furious sob. "You what?" "I've put up with you 'cause your kin pa let you gamble away every dime without a peep. I ain't against remarrying someday, but Sam Tucker? You can't shove me into that pit. He's a low-down skunk, and you know it. I won't do it, never. Luke's face hardened. Levi could see his silhouette stiffen through the cracked window. Without a word, he stepped forward and slapped Sadie hard across the cheek. That was it, Levi'd had enough. Gripping the yoke he'd carried all day, he charged through the door shouting, "Back off, you old buzzard." Luke jumped, startled as Levi burst in like a tornado. Recovering quick, he pointed a shaky finger. "Who in tarnation are you?" Then he spun to Sadie, smirking. "Well, I'll be. Here's why you're so picky about Maureen, huh? Sneaking some fella in behind my back. You little." "Shut your mouth, Pa." Sadie snapped, cutting him off. "Don't you dare twist this. He's the one who saved me and Tommy today. You'd know that if you weren't off losing our last dime." But Luke wasn't hearing it. He doubled down, spewing filth about Sadie's honor. Levi's blood boiled. He couldn't stand by while this snake slandered her. He swung the yoke, aiming for Luke's shoulder. The old man dodged, cussing a blue streak, and stumbled out the door, vanishing into the dark. Levi didn't stick around to see if he'd come back. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said to Sadie, voice low. "Didn't mean to stir up more trouble. I'll clear out." She nodded, still shaken, and he took off, yoke over his shoulder, into the rainy night. An hour later, he was trudging back toward Plainview, retracing the path where he'd met Sadie and Trent Parker the day before. The rain had let up, leaving the air thick and damp. As he plodded along, something in the roadside brush caught his eye. He stopped, peering closer. There, sprawled in the wet grass, lay Rusty, Trent's hound, motionless. Levi knelt for a better look. It was the same dog he'd clobbered yesterday, no doubt about it. He'd figured it was dead after that hit, but up close, he felt a twinge of pity. The mutt wasn't the villain here, Trent was. That rich punk treated Rusty like a tool, and once it broke, he'd chucked it aside like trash. Shaking his head, Levi reached out to drag the dog off the road. Least he could do was bury it proper. But when his hand brushed its matted fur, he felt a faint warmth. He pressed harder. Rusty's chest rose, shallow but steady. The dang thing was alive. A grin split Levi's face. He hefted the hound up, cradling it in his arms, and turned back toward Jed Carter's store in Plainview. If Rusty could hang on, maybe there was hope for it yet. When he staggered into the shop, oil cans clanking as he set them down, he spilled the whole tale to Jed, Trent, Sadie, the dog, all of it. Old Jed didn't say much, just scratched his beard and muttered, "That Parker boy won't let this lie, Levi. Watch your back." Levi nodded, then rummaged up some scraps to feed Rusty. He cleaned the mutt's wounds with a rag and water, and by some miracle, the dog's eyes fluttered open. Stranger still, when Rusty came to, that wild, mean glint was gone, replaced by something softer, almost grateful. Levi stared, dumbfounded. What in the world had changed this beast overnight? Before he could puzzle it out, the shop door banged open. Two rough-looking deputies stormed in, badges glinting. Without a word, one clapped a pair of irons on Levi's wrists while the other barked, "You're coming with us, boy, county jail. Move it." Levi didn't even get a chance to argue. They hauled him out, Rusty whining faintly behind him, and marched him off into the night. Levi Winston stumbled as the deputies shoved him into the Plainview County Jail, wrists chafed raw from the iron cuffs. The cell door clanged shut behind him, and it wasn't till they hauled him before the county judge the next morning that he got the full story. Turns out, he'd landed smack in the middle of a murder rap. That very dawn, someone had found old man Luke Green dead, throat cut, sprawled in a ditch outside Parker's Hollow. A neighbor swore up and down they'd seen Levi skulking around Sadie's shack the night before, and that was enough to pin him as the killer. Levi's head spun like he'd been hit by 5 thunderbolts. He blurted out everything: Trent Parker's dog, Sadie's trouble, Luke's rotten scheme to sell her off, the scuffle in the shack. He laid it all bare, one truth after another, to Judge Amos Tate. The judge, a wiry man with a gray beard and sharp eyes, sized Levi up. He didn't look like your typical backwoods thug, more like a bookish kid fallen on hard times. Levi's story held water, too, no cracks or stutters. Tate's gut told him this boy was likely framed, 8 ways to Sunday. To get to the bottom of it, he ordered Trent Parker dragged into court. When Trent swaggered in, all cocksure in his tailored vest, something wild happened. Rusty, the hound Levi had patched up, came limping in from nowhere, trailing behind Jed Carter, who'd shown up to watch. The dog took one look at Trent and went berserk, lunging at him with a snarl. Before anyone could blink, Rusty's teeth tore into Trent's fancy coat, ripping it to shreds. The courtroom froze, folks gawking. Deputies yanked Rusty back, but not before Judge Tate spotted something. Scratches, fresh and red, crisscrossing Trent's arm where the sleeve hung in tatters. Tate leaned forward, voice like steel. "Parker, speak plain, where'd those marks come from?" Why'd the judge zero in on that? Well, when they'd inspected old man Luke's body, they'd found his right hand busted up, nails snapped, with skin flakes wedged underneath. Clear as day, Luke had clawed at his killer in a last-ditch fight. Now, with Rusty exposing Trent's arm, those scratches looked mighty suspicious. Trent stammered, spinning a yarn about some barroom brawl, but it was flimsy as wet paper. Judge Tate shot it down, question by question, till Trent couldn't talk his way out. After a grilling that left him sweating bullets, Trent cracked. Here's what came out. After Levi whacked Rusty and bolted with Sadie the day before, Trent got held up by the angry crowd. Once they scattered, he'd hunted for Levi to settle the score, but the trail was cold. Pitched a fit, he dumped Rusty's body in the brush, thinking the dog was done for. Later, he'd asked around and tracked Levi and Sadie to her shack. That's when he saw Luke stumble out, cussing after Levi's run in. Trent tailed the old man, prying out that Levi'd been there. A dark idea sparked. He'd frame Levi for murder. He ambushed Luke, slit his throat, and tossed him in a ditch. Then he greased a neighbor's palm with a few silver dollars to swear Levi was the culprit. The neighbor cooked up a lie, said Levi and Sadie were sweet on each other, and when Luke caught wind, Levi killed him to hush it up. Only hitch? In that final scrap, Luke had raked Trent's arm good, leaving damning proof under his nails. Once Rusty ripped Trent's coat, the jig was up. The truth spilled out like whiskey from a busted barrel. Judge Tate didn't waste time. Trent and the lying neighbor got slapped with the full weight of the law, Trent for murder, the neighbor for bearing false witness. As for Levi, Tate saw potential in him, a smart kid with a knack for words, not a lick of malice. He cleared him of the charge, then offered him a clerk job at the courthouse. On top of that, figuring Sadie could use a decent man after all this mess, he hitched her to Levi right there in the county records. 3 years later, Levi passed the state scholar exams, then aced the bar to become a lawyer. The tale pretty much ends there, folks. Some of you might wonder, how'd Rusty go from a snarling brute to a loyal mutt overnight? Well, there's a touch of tall tale magic in that. Old sayings round here go, a good man raises a good dog, a mean one breeds a cur. Rusty wasn't born bad, Trent made him that way. With Levi, he turned gentle. Dogs are man's truest pals, and they've got a spirit to 'em, good or evil depends on who's holding the leash. That's the hunger of it, not the dogs, but the folks who shape 'em. And there you have it, the end of the wolf in the cattle barn. If you liked this yarn, drop a note below, hit that subscribe button, and share it round. Thanks for listening, y'all. Catch you in the next one.